I wish to review with you even some of the recent things that we have taught you regarding one specific consciousness grid called the crystalline grid. Again, I will state this. The magnetic grid, the Gaia grid, and the crystalline grid are esoteric grids. All of them are things you can feel and that are operational today. One of them is physics, the magnetics. The other two are not. They are esoteric. The crystalline grid doesn't have a pattern you can draw ley lines with. It is not something anybody has ever given you that has to do with history or mythology. The crystalline grid is totally and completely given to you by the Pleiadians. The three kinds of grids that I have spoken of are all benevolent to humanity. This is the Kryon teaching. We teach you so that you'll know how these things work, and so that you will be aware of the benevolence and the plan that would take place if you made it past the marker of 2012, and you did. The magnetic grid we've talked about so long. The Gaia grid, it's going to come into play in a moment. But the crystalline, this one is confusing to many. And we've also told you that the crystalline grid does not lay upon the earth like you think it does. It is a metaphor for an energy of remembrance that is all over this planet. Into the dirt, above the dirt. It really doesn't have a place like 3D or like a grid on the ground. And it is metaphoric of something that remembers. The crystalline grid of the planet is a remembering grid of human action and emotion. It helps humanity in so many different ways. It lays upon where civilization is. It lays upon the planet even where the water is. And it remembers things that happen. Now, the proof of this is evident. When an old soul perhaps would walk in to that which used to be a battlefield of significance on the planet. And you would walk into it and you'd feel the sorrow, the death, the crying, the goodbyes to life, the calls to your mother of the dying ones. You could hear the voices. That's a sensitive. Even those who are not sensitive will walk in and say, it doesn't feel good here. I want to leave. Now, this is the crystalline grid at work. If I ask you, what else could there be that would hold memory? There is no question that you're feeling energy, that you're feeling the energy of the event, but there has to be a process that holds it there, and it's the crystalline grid. When joyful things happen, the grid remembers the joyful things. This is a system of compatibility to planet Earth and also to humanity. You don't understand exactly why a remembering grid would help you, but it does. It helps in your evolution. It helps you to know the things that you don't want. It is actually a cover, you might say, for the Gaia grid. Now listen. The Gaia grid is Mother Earth. It is the feeling you have in the forest. Every tree hugger knows this grid. It is the one that says, all I want to do is stand here and listen to the trees. All I want to do is put my fingers in the dirt, because this I understand and humans I don't. There is a life in Gaia. In fact, there is a very raw life in Gaia. So raw is it, dear ones, that the crystalline grid, I tell you this for the first time, the crystalline grid actually covers the rawness of Gaia in certain ways, in certain areas, so that it's safe to be there. In what used to be Lemuria, it is now the islands of Hawaii. My partner has repeatedly stood on the edge of the volcano with ceremony after ceremony, thanking Gaia, having no idea that he's not participating in the rawness of it because the crystalline grid is there. It's almost a protection. The grids work together. They work together for the benevolence of humanity. So places are safe to be where you can feel energy and you can see and feel what has taken place. It's complex. Did you know that the grids of consciousness are not just on the surface? They go below the earth as well, because Gaia is involved all the way through, not just in a thin layer you call the surface. That's Gaia energy. Perhaps you would understand the force of Gaia energy if you understood it goes all the way through. The magnetic grid, it sits on the outside. The crystalline grid, it is both in and out. But the Gaia grid is enormous and filled with energy that is astonishing. All three grids are multidimensional. All of them. The magnetic grid is a quantum experience, and physicists will tell you that magnetics has a quantum attribute. The crystalline grid is invisible. It is a quantum grid. It is esoteric. It is spiritual. But it has to do literally with life on earth, with your physicalness. It has to do with your consciousness. It is allied to you. The Gaia grid, ask an indigenous thousands of years ago what they did when they met Gaia. They allied with Gaia because they knew of the power and the force. They counted on it for the hunting grounds, for rain, for all the things that were. There was a crystalline grid then too, but the indigenous understood the Gaia grid and its power. They treated it with great respect. Years ago, I told you that where the grids interface and come together in a special way, there are anomalies and oddities. I mentioned that the oddities often have patterns which are different. Many of them are at sea. But because of this interface of Gaia, of the crystalline and magnetics, there are anomalies. Now, an anomaly means that there are interruptions in the patterning. The interesting thing about these anomalies is they're not necessarily harmonious. In fact, quite often they're triangular, 3 sides. They often represent the mathematics of prime. We never told you that either. Now, this will not be understood by any of you. But there will be somebody listening who puts together what prime numbers are and what they mean. 1, 3, 5, 7. And you start understanding that there is something special about them. They are unique to themselves, only divisible by 1 and themselves. The anomaly you have when this takes place on the planet is not very often. One of them we told you about. It's off the coast of what you call Florida. Some have called it the Bermuda Triangle. And what you find there is very interesting. It's always accompanied by magnetic variation, because the magnetics of the planet is part of the anomaly. Remember, it's the interface between magnetics, the crystalline, and Gaia. And things are different. One of the things that takes place in every single one of these anomalies is that it voids the crystalline grid. So there are places on this planet, almost all of them over water, that have no crystalline in a certain area, usually a small area.